In another week of action, we are starting to see separation at the top of the table. Plus, we will get you ready for the Rivalry Series. All of that coming up on today's episode of the Women's Hockey Report.
This is the Women's Hockey Report presented by Locked On NHL. Your weekly look at the world of women's hockey. From the PWHL to the international stage, it's the Women's Hockey Report on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings and salutations, women's hockey fans. Welcome to another episode of the Women's Hockey Report, brought to you by Locked On NHL and the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your team, or I guess, again, your favorite genre of sports. In our case, every single Saturday. Erica L. Ayala, joined once again by Rachel Donner. Let's do our vibe check before we get into the show. Rachel, how you feeling?
Feeling good. The lesson of the week is to wear your merch. I was wearing a New York Sirens hoodie. There was some banging going on in my apartment building here in New York, and I had to record. So I was like, I got to take care of this. I go knock on the door. Somebody opens the door and says, New York Sirens, my sister plays for that team. So got a very easy negotiation to get the noise down when I needed it to, and had a lot of good things to say about Abby Levy. So hello, Abby Levy's brother. Hope you're having a great day.
I love it. The Levy family, showing some respect, obviously, for women's hockey, but also for the schedule of a podcaster. So thank you for that. That's awesome. That was such an awesome story to hear from you. As far as me, you might be able to hear, especially for our audio listeners, voice is a little bit strained. You know, it's that time of year. No one is feeling 100% at this time in the hockey season, aka the cold and flu season. So I'm dealing with a little bit of that, but we'll have a little bit of a break in PWHL action, but not in women's hockey action. So excited to get through whatever this little bug is and talk more women's hockey. But let's get into it. So we mentioned at the top of the show that there's a little bit of separation now at the top of the table, and Montreal and Minnesota really starting to find their stride, Rachel.
Yeah, and I would say on the Minnesota side of things, you know, they had been struggling a little bit, especially at home. And to see them have like a pretty successful latter half of the week was really good for them, winning 5-2 over Boston and 4-3 over Toronto in that very exciting game that led to a shootout. And, you know, I think it is something that we've been slightly worried about them for a while with their record at home. So to see that turnaround was really good.
It's always nice to be able to take care of things when you have the home ice advantage, and at least presumably the crowd in your favor. So, and also it's something that Kendall Coyne Schofield talked to us about. And I don't know, Rachel, is there such a thing as the WoHo Report bump? Because, Kendall Coyne Schofield's been kind of lighting it up recently.
She has. So she's got 3 goals and 3 assists in her last 5 games and has been a huge part of why Minnesota has been so successful as of late. Minnesota, in fact, has the top 3 points havers in the league as of now. 3 of them tied for first place with 14 points. Kendall Coyne Schofield having the most goals with 6, but between her and then Taylor Heise, who we're going to talk about a little bit later in the show, along with Claire Thompson, who had a monster game against Toronto, 2 goals, 1 assist.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned, we're going to talk about truly all 3 of them a little bit later in the show when we talk about the Rivalry Series. I think also, though, we have to talk about who's at the top of the table, and that is the Montreal Victoire. They were able to get things done against Toronto last night. They were able to get things done Thursday night, and be able to retain that top spot. They're currently sitting on 28 points, so 3 points ahead of the aforementioned Minnesota Frost. I mean, what are some of the things you've been seeing, Rachel, from Montreal that has them at the top of the table?
I think there's like twofold goings on in Montreal. Number one, they're getting amazing goaltending from both Anne-Renee Desbiens and Elaine Chuli. So Chuli, who again, maybe the little bump here because you talked about Elaine Chuli on our goaltending segment.
Right.
She had a fantastic game in that shootout win over Toronto, and just like, yeah, really did a fantastic job stoning Toronto in that shootout in particular. And then Anne-Renee Desbiens, of course, is their number one goaltender. She's now tied with Emmerich Matchmeyer for the top save percentage in the league, and has the lowest goals against average. And they have this thing called qualified goalies in their stats. So you had to have played 240 plus minutes in order to qualify for their ranking. So put that asterisk wherever you will in your minds, but still, like, they're getting fantastic goaltending across the board.
I think that's huge, and maybe it's just my bias because I've been dealing with a goaltending conundrum with the Seattle Kraken truly all season long, but came to a head with Philip Grubauer going on waivers. But needless to say, it's important to have good goaltending and at least two goaltenders that you can rely on, and I think that's what Montreal is getting. And I think I really love that you mentioned Elaine Chuli again because I saw in the comments I was able to watch the first part of this game against Toronto before I had to transition off to do another podcast. And I saw people in the comments that first goal went in. I believe it was Jessie Compher scored that first goal, and it was a little bit of a bounced off the boards and truly just narrowly missed getting in. And I was
Right.
like, oh, in the comments, people saying, oh, Chuli, maybe she gives up soft goals. I was like, oh no, no, no. Oh
No,
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 no.
no. Oh, no, no, just wait. So I love that. Yeah, in Chuli I trust. So, definitely love to see that Elaine Chuli was able to show out and get Montreal that win.
Yeah, and then I would say, the Marie-Philip Poulin effect
Mm,
is happening there. I don't think she's struggled this season by any means. I just think the expectations for her are so
super high.
high
Yeah.
that it's, like, hard to compare to herself, but she is absolutely coming on strong at the moment. She got a hat trick, in that Wednesday game against Ottawa, and so I think that leadership and setting an example as well as producing is a big part of it. And I would add just like an unsung hero, maybe she's sung, but to me, she's a little unsung, is Jennifer Gardner. Was a big standout in that game as well, a goal and 2 assists, but it felt like she was everywhere on the ice in that game.
Yeah, definitely got a shout out again in the early parts of that game against Toronto. And just to go back to the MPP point, I mean, Canadians are gonna get, I guess, a little bit of Captain Clutch on the women's and men's side coming up here in February. But Marie-Philip Poulin, I mean, especially when playing the United States, it's not always the quantity, right? But it's the timing. I mean, Marie-Philip Poulin for me is like one of the ultimate athletes when it comes to, excuse me, when it comes to getting the right goal at the right time or making the right play at the right time. So, that Montreal is definitely benefiting from that. And I don't think you can ever bet against MPP.
No, and honestly, like, now that Laura Stacey's back, I think it's even better, right?
Right. Yeah, Laura Stacy, who also I think are gonna have to talk about when it comes to this rivalry series. Just on the other side of the coin though, Rachel, I mean, things getting a little tough for Toronto and for Boston in particular. Now, Toronto, tough loss for them in their most recent
Yeah.
outing against Montreal, but that does bump them ahead of the Boston Fleet. So, we'll talk about the games coming up, but it just seems like there's still some things that Toronto wants to be able to figure out. Again, they were able to score early in this game against Montreal, but just couldn't put it away.
Yeah, and they are at the lowest points percentage in the league right now. Toronto is so, yeah, they're having a tough go of it, and I feel like we've talked about this a little bit, but Sarah Nurse and Daryl Watts, it feels like they're putting everything on their own shoulders, and they're taking a lot of shot attempts, but it just isn't going as much. And that's where, like, I feel like they just don't get enough good puck movement in order to get higher quality chances. out there. And again, like these two are kind of shouldering a lot of the responsibility on that team. And so, you know, I think it should in theory come for them eventually, but the problem is, will it be too late at that point?
Right. Absolutely. And then, there's the really interesting dynamic where how much are you chasing trying to get into good playoff position versus maybe hedging your bets to see if you can fall out of position to then try and catch up and per
Yes.
the gold plan, right?
Yep.
Be able to then maybe be in position for a top pick via the draft. So I think there's still some runway before Toronto or Boston, for that matter, has to maybe be a little strategic in that way, if even they entertain that. However, definitely something that we're gonna keep an eye on. But coming up, as promised, and we teased this on the last episode, Rachel, let's talk about the rivalry series. Who is on the team, who is not on the team? Because there are some differences from November to February. We'll break that down, but also any snubs. We'll talk about all of that when it comes to the Hockey Canada and USA Hockey rosters coming up on the Women's Hockey Report.
Attending a sporting event or concert or show is an unforgettable experience that brings fans together, and Game Time has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And recently, I was looking for tickets to see Wicked on Broadway, which I haven't seen in a long, long time, but given the movie, wanted to remember how it ended. And so browsing through the deals on Game Time was simple. I found great value for all kinds of seats around the venue, and the super deal was especially impressive. It offered the best value for the event. The app's features like seat views before you buy and all in pricing with no surprise fees at checkout made the experience smooth and reliable. Plus, on time ticket delivery and lowest price guarantee gave me peace of mind. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code Locked On NHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem with the code Locked On NHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Rachel, I'm keeping you on screen here because we offline talk about your setup here, but I noticed some bobbleheads. They look like some WNBA bobbleheads. Just wanted to give you an opportunity to shout them out here.
Yeah, I think I have a Becky Hammond, New York
Ah,
Liberty
that's the one
on
that I was
there.
like, who
In
is
the
that?
middle, I've got Natalie Williams from the
That's a
Utah
throwback.
Stars.
Yes, love that.
Um,
Who
yeah, so
then
those are my
reunited, yeah, with Becky, or they crossed
yeah,
paths in Vegas. So
in
anyway,
Vegas. Yep.
I love that. Just wanted to give the shelf a shout out because we don't always get to see all of it. I love it. All right, let's get back to women's hockey here because we've got the rivalry series, and a lot of people, speaking of tickets, right, call this one of the hottest tickets that you can get in women's hockey, especially on the international stage. If you're not going to women's worlds, which is coming up, of course, or the Olympics. So we did have a first installment of the rivalry series in November. Now we are re-upping the series. These will be games played in Canada, the first part of the series primarily in the United States. So Rachel, what are some things that you've noticed with regard to the rosters?
Yeah, so the biggest thing about the roster changes between November and February is because we are in season for the NCAA hockey, those players are not available to play. And so, you look at Team Canada's roster and you don't see Chloe Primarano there. And you're like, what?
I'm
She's
like, what's
amazing.
going on?
Yes, she is. She can't be there because of college. On Team USA, it's a much more significant impact.
Yes,
So, absent this time are, amongst others, but Joy Dunn, Caroline Harvey, Layla Edwards,
yep,
Abby Murphy, Tessa Janicki, Lacey Eden, Kirsten Sims, like huge swaths of the
yes,
potential Team USA roster for Worlds. And so that's why, like, this part of the rivalry series, I put a little asterisk. I love my little asterisks, but I put it next to the rosters here just because, we're missing some significant talent on both teams, but
Right.
also it gives the chance for some other players to maybe make an impact and make their case, right?
It really does. And I think what's interesting is that while you are missing players that also they had an impact in the first round of the rivalry series, I'm very interested to see what this means, just looking ahead just a little bit when it comes to April, because we will have the opportunity, because NCAA hockey at least will be wrapped by then. We have the opportunity to see a little bit of a mix and match of what we saw in November versus what we might see now in February. So I always find it fascinating, what decisions are these federations going to make, as we march closer to Women's Worlds, which will be in Czechia. But also, again, we have a pretty short ramp leading up to the next Olympics. So always looking ahead and curious to see who's getting opportunities because of the NCAA players not competing in this part of the rivalry series, and what impact will that have on the rosters that we see in April. So with that said, let's talk about some of the players who are additions, from the last set of rivalry series games.
Yeah, so on Team Canada, the additions are really interesting to me. So we've already talked about Jennifer Gardner on the show, and she was an addition to Team Canada, the lone forward added there. For defenders, we've got Micah Zandy Hart, the New York Sirens captain, as well as Sophie Jakes, defender from the Minnesota Frost. And the Sophie Jakes addition is, I think, could be, as far as skaters go, the most impactful of all of them.
Yeah, I like that addition there. Sophie Jakes, has been, in the conversation at the NCAA level for quite some time, made an impact when she came over to Minnesota, and won that championship last year. So I love that. And then, because this is a show where we're shouting out the New York Sirens and goaltending, apparently, one more addition, which I think we both appreciate.
Yeah, Corrine Schroeder, goaltender for the New York Sirens. Obviously, we talked about her very recently on the show, just being a huge part of wins that New York was getting, and she's had incredible performances. And I think that's where, I think we're seeing a bigger difference between last season and this season in terms of the impact that the PWHL
Hmm.
and gameplay in the PWHL is having on these national team rosters, right? Because Corrine Schroeder absolutely has proven herself to get this opportunity with Team Canada.
And has been a part of the conversation in the past, when with the PHF and the Boston Pride, as we've talked about just some of her numbers there. And so for her to be able to repeat that in a league that a lot of people say is a level up from what we've seen in the past, I mean, I definitely think there's an argument to
Right.
be made. We can go into that some other time. But again, you're starting to see, players like Corrine Schroeder, excuse me, be able to really make a mark and an impact. All right, so that's the Maple Leaf side of things, right? Let's talk about USA. And you already mentioned some of the snubs, or not, excuse me, not the snubs. We'll get to some snubs a little later. You mentioned some of the NCAA players. Also, just want to note that between those players that will not be returning because they're going to remain with their NCAA team, Layla Edwards, Abby Murphy, and Lacey Eden in particular, that's 5 goals on the board that USA doesn't have. So who's stepping up to take some of that over?
I think the most significant name here is Jessie Compher from
Absolutely.
the Toronto Scepters. I think, despite the fact that Toronto is struggling, she's still an incredible talent and, has been in and around USA hockey. And so to have her back on this team, I think will help tremendously in terms of, production related to those numbers you were just talking about. They also added Gabby Rosenthal from the Sirens. And then on the blue line, we've got Anna Wilgren from Montreal and Sydney Bard from the Boston Fleet. Now, Sydney Bard, this is her first women's national team look. So congratulations to her. And I
Absolutely.
think, again, chances are slim because of these NCAA players, but she'll have all the opportunity in the world to make a case and put her in the conversation.
Absolutely. I think that's exactly what you want to see. Again, there's a little bit of, I don't want to call it experimentation, but definitely, like you said, giving players a different look. Now, what that will mean for, of course, first women's worlds and then again, the Olympics, we will see. But I think these games have the potential to at least give us a baseline. And then we get to have fun and experiment on a podcast. And of course, wax poetic on what we think the roster should be for Worlds, at least based on
Yeah.
these games. But then, of course, as I alluded to, there are some players that maybe are they snubs? Question mark, because of everything that I just said. I think you can consider them snubs in a way, especially if they just haven't made a mark with the national team. But again, I do think that there's a little bit of trying out experimentation going on here.
Right.
So it's a little less of a hard snub, maybe like a snub light.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what's so interesting about the PWHL becoming more of a proving ground for these players for the national team, and they sort of need the rivalry series less and less.
Mm,
Uh, I think as this league progresses, we'll see a little bit more of that where maybe the rivalry I know we've cut down the rivalry series once already, but maybe the need for it might go away at some point, but we'll see. But in the meantime, I think, on the Team USA side of things, Maddie Rooney was not put on this roster and Nicole Hensley was. And, I don't necessarily think it's a one for one with the two of them. You look at Gwyneth Phillips as the third goaltender for Team USA. Now, maybe they just want somebody there who's never going to play in the series and they don't want to sit Maddie Rooney and Nicole Hensley at the same time. And that could have something to do with it. But Gwyneth Phillips had a rough game against Montreal on Wednesday and got pulled. So, you look at that and you can ask the question, but again, to your point, is this just for, functionality's sake here that these decisions
right.
were made?
Yeah, and then also you never know. I kind of joked around with my hoarse voice today, but no one's 100% healthy going through, especially if these are players competing in the PWHL. We don't know for sure, but maybe there's just something where it's not that these players can't go, but if they could also maybe get additional rest in that period, you never know. There's a bunch of things that could
Yep.
be going on. So we'll just have to see how that plays out. I will say that it just seems like there has been this double dutch when it comes to Maddie Rooney and Nicole Hensley for a while now with Team
Yeah.
USA.
Yeah. It feels like they're put in competition with each other in a not as positive way as
Yeah.
sometimes goalie competitions are. So it is interesting to see that again. The other player, Abby Boreen, I absolutely think in this circumstance with room to experiment, why not give her a shot?
Yep.
She's just having a tremendous season with Montreal so far with 5 goals and 3 assists in 13 games and has had highlight reel goals this year. And it just seems like, come on, what are we doing here?
Yeah, again, an experimentational ground here. Don't see why, especially if you look at, as we have been told for years, even before the PWHL is official, right? This is the best of the best going up against each other. And Abby Boreen is top 20 when it comes to scorers in the PWHL. And then if you account for USA born players only, is really top 10. So I think it's interesting to your point. Why not? You know that you're going to be a little bit more NCAA heavy, especially for Team USA in the November series. Why not give someone like Abby Boreen a chance? But that was a decision that was made. I think that could be interesting to see. I thought your point regarding the usefulness of the rivalry series was really interesting. It might be something we come back to, but while it's still around and in existence. And I think the value added is because you can experiment with your roster before Worlds, then why not really do that in earnest? And again, if this is the best league, and I think it's definitely a step up from NCAA, then, put some respect on the names of players that are going up against some of the top talent Olympians, not just from North America, and holding their own. So I'm with you there. Now let's go to the other side of things. I want to start with a player who, again, if we look at the PWHL and look at where the player was born, might be interesting why we don't see a player like Hannah Muller. So Hannah Muller is from Canada. However, I do want to, before I give the caveat, Hannah Muller, 7 goals, 5 assists for Toronto. Now, her PWHL GM and head coach are also the Hockey Canada GM and head coach. So it's not like Hockey Canada doesn't know about Hannah Muller, at least in theory, right? But the caveat here is that Hannah Muller competed for China in the 2022 Olympics. And so if I had to guess, I'm not brushed up, Rachel, on exactly what the what I almost said FIBA because I'm thinking of basketball, but what the IIHF rules are. But once you compete at the Olympic stage for a federation, I believe you are considered a part of that federation, and so
Right.
Hannah would not likely be eligible to compete for Hockey Canada.
Yeah, but certainly could be in the mix if she could.
Yes,
That's for
indeed.
sure.
Indeed. So with taking Hannah Muller off the table, then, who else do we look at perhaps to see, why they might not be or why they aren't on this Hockey Canada roster despite how they're doing in the PWHL?
I mean, Jessie Eldridge is obviously like one of the biggest names that comes to mind here. She's got 4 goals and 8 assists for the New York Sirens. And, that is more than Sarah Nurse, more than Marie-Philip Poulin, more than Daryl Watts. And I think, is there room for her? Is it a fit thing? Is it a where do we put her thing? That's possible. But also, this is the time you experiment and figure that
Right.
out.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens. Again, Worlds will tell us kind of where we think these two teams want to go as far as who's in the pipeline. So we'll definitely take a look at that. But we told you who's not going to be competing, who did in November. We've told you who is on the team and even some snubs ? But now it's time to let folks know, where do we stand when it comes to the Rivalry Series? 3 games, Rachel, in November. And of course, everyone wants to know, between Hockey Canada and USA Hockey, who has bragging rights going into the next couple of games.
Well, it's Team Canada right now who lead 2-1, although it is very close. So there was a very dominant win in game 1 for Team USA. It was a 7-2 win. And then there was a shootout loss for Team USA and then a solid win for Team Canada following that. So I would say it's pretty close going into these next games.
Absolutely. And the games, again, they will be in Canada. You have Thursday, February 6th in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And then Saturday, February 8th, Prince Edward Island. Both of those games you can watch on NHL Network. And of course, we will keep you posted on everything as we go through the women's hockey report. I love international hockey. I love a little international break. And I'm excited. I'm excited for this Rivalry Series. I always love the international game, but we also have a little bit more PWHL action, Rachel, to take care of. So coming up next, we are going to review the 3 stars of the game. Some of them we've already talked about, Rachel. And then we will once again pick our games to watch. So that's all coming up on the Women's Hockey Report. In the words of Matthew McConaughey, all right. Let's get into this one, Rachel Donner. So we talked about the standings.
I was worried you're going to go with the other quote, but continue.
You're like, wait, what's going on? This was not in the show notes. Anyway, moving on here. We have some stars of the week. Now, we already mentioned Hannah Muller, we mentioned Taylor Heise, but the first star in this last week of games belongs to a player from the Boston Fleet, also an Olympian, in Alina Muller.
Yeah, she had a fantastic night for the Boston Fleet against Toronto and had a goal and 3 assists over the course of the week in 2 games. And she's a name, a huge standout in international hockey, right?
Yep.
And she hasn't really popped yet this season until this week. So hopefully this will be something that will spur her and the Boston Fleet, because I think they could very much use her scoring moving
Yeah,
forward.
they without a doubt need a spark. And to your point, is this where Mueller really shines? You know, we talked about the Bean Pod, and those in the Boston area, they need no introduction to Alina Mueller, just a fantastic player. And again, has been on the international stage for quite a long time. I mean, is still young, but at the international stage, because of just her skill, has been with the national team for quite some time. Hannah Muller, second star. This is just someone who, if you listen to the broadcasts, if you kind of listen to or even watch some of the social media videos, just Hannah Muller seems like someone that the Toronto Scepters really rely on and also like to have some fun with on social media. Second star. Rachel, what can you tell us about Hannah Muller?
Yeah, I mean, she had a 2-goal game this week, and I think that there's a reason why we talked about her in the international conversation, right? Even though, she's not eligible to play for Team Canada, but that's one of the reasons why I'm so grateful we have the PWHL, and to give her a chance to have these moments. Now, again, it's very interesting that, the top 2 stars this week are from teams that have been struggling, right? In the
Yeah.
Boston Fleet and the Toronto Scepters. And I think that, you know, if the Scepters are gonna get out of the basement here, Miller and other players like her are gonna have to step up and have it not just be like a 1 or 2 player show there.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And then someone that we mentioned at the top of the show coming in as the third star, Taylor Heise, not surprised here at all, came in with this league as, a very a very well-known player, that top pick for Minnesota in that first ever draft, and had to deal with some injuries, I think, in that first season, but has been bouncing back. And as we mentioned, Minnesota is starting to roar back, and I'm very curious to see if they'll be able to really jockey for that one spot again here. But it's going to have to come from performances like we got from Taylor Heise in the last week.
Yeah, and in her last 5 games, she has 2 goals and 3 assists, and like you said, it's gonna be key to have a lot of varied contribution for Minnesota here in order to stay at the top.
Indeed. All right, those are your 3 stars. We'll see if they can stay at the top of the 3 stars presented by Shark Beauty here. Let's now pick our game of the week. And I'm going to start with you mostly because I think I'm having a little trouble picking a game of the week. So, Rachel, you've got one locked and loaded here. Who do you have? What game are you watching and why?
Well, it's gonna be Montreal at New York. Now, New York is the only team with 2 games in
Yep.
this shortened week before the Rivalry Series international break, and so, like, it's gonna be tough for them. We're not talking about the game from last night on the show because this is a Saturday show, and we don't know the results of that yet, for their game against Boston, but Montreal, we talked about them. Can they keep this going? And New York has been at or near the top, but now is like just below those top 2 teams. And so to get a win against Montreal would be huge for them to stay up there and be part of that top team conversation.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, New York, the only team that plays twice here. That game that you're mentioning is going to be at the Prudential Center, so it's a home game for the New York Sirens. Maybe some of your neighbors there, the Abby Murphy's family, will be in attendance. But for me, because of what you said, I also was kind of locked in on New York. But I can't help but think about Toronto and Boston as well. I just think that one of those teams has got to start getting some momentum. But then you also throw in Ottawa in the mix because, as you mentioned, New York, they're in that 3 spot right now. And are any of those teams, Ottawa, Boston, or Toronto, going to be able to disrupt a little of what we're seeing in that 3-4 spot? I don't know. It's looking a little tough there. But all of that to say that my game that I'm going to be locked in on this week is actually going to be the Ottawa Toronto game. Again, the New York Boston game will already have gone final by the time this episode airs. So even though I do think that New York Boston game is going to be interesting at Zonga Center, I'm just going to go ahead and say Ottawa Toronto, because Ottawa to me is a very intriguing team, but I don't think that they've earned the benefit of the doubt when it comes to them being able to take care of the bottom 2 teams. And so Ottawa for me really has to be able to show that they can hang there in that middle group, and they're going to have to take care of business against Toronto. That's Saturday, February 1st, excuse me. We're already in a new month, at 2 p.m. Eastern time. So that's the one I'm going to be watching at Coca-Cola Coliseum. Well, that wraps up another episode of the Women's Hockey Report. Rachel Donner alongside me, Erica L. Ayala, as your co-hosts. And there's a lot of exciting women's hockey coming up. We're going to wrap up these 3 games in the PWHL and then get ready for the Rivalry Series. Let us know in the comments. Are you Team USA? Are you all about Hockey Canada, or are you just, I'm definitely stealing this from the PWHL, or do you just want to see some good hockey, everyone having
Here
fun?
for a good time.
That's it. Just here for a good time. Let us know in the comments, and we will catch you on the next Women's Hockey Report. Until then, peace out, everybody.